Hey everyone, happy Sunday and welcome to Call the AD, where the A stands for Arthur and the D stands for Dan. Today's topic, what moves you? Do movements matter? And that's certainly not an absolute answer. It's an opinion, right? Do they matter to me? Do they matter to Dan? Do they matter to you watching? So I think it should be an interesting discussion. So
Yeah, definitely. First of all, what are you wearing today?
I'm wearing my Speedy Pro on this tan calf leather strap from Deluxe, one of my favorite strap makers. Not sponsored, no influencing going on. I just really like them.
That almost looks like the stock strap you get on the Foss.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a little lighter color, but that's padded cream stitching. They do good stuff, yeah.
I'm surprised you're wearing that this time of year because it's quite hot there, isn't it?
Yeah, it started to cool down, and I was actually really excited to get back onto wearing some straps, some leather
Yeah.
rather, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you wearing?
Submariner today.
Nice. You know,
Fantastic.
I thought I heard one or two people on the internet talking about the Submariner recently. I don't know what's going on. Do you?
See, I thought we weren't going to go there today. I thought so everyone on here, we basically agreed, Arthur and I, not to talk about anything Rolex, nothing at all. But I did wonder how long it was going to take to come up. And you
I just figured we,
record.
I just figured we'd get it out of the way and say, we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. Rolex does. See you next week. You know,
Exactly.
I mean, there's new rumors by the day, and we'll just leave it at that. Anyway, yeah. So it's good to see you wearing the sub. It looks really good.
Yeah, yeah. I go. I spoke about this before. I just go through stages with it where I really enjoy it, and then it just kind of stays in the box for a while, and it comes out again. And I think you're constantly rediscovering your own collection, aren't you? All the time.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
like
am.
that.
Like you, for example. You're quite good in rotation and with your spreadsheet and making sure that you do get the use out of it. Whereas I'm more like I'll just wear one watch for a week or 2 weeks sometimes, and then I go back to another watch again. So
Yeah. You go through a rotation. It's just a different frequency, right? You're just sort of
yeah,
spending a
exactly.
bit more time with each one. Actually, so my tracking exercise, I know is a bit ridiculous, but it made me realize I was like, why am I not wearing my Speedmaster that much? And I realized, oh, I think I need to change the strap, and that'll do it for me. So that I've been wearing it a lot since I popped this on the other day. So
And that's definitely something that changes. As soon as you change the strap, it almost feels like a new watch, doesn't it?
yeah, it does,
We,
especially
we,
the
we've
Speedy.
we've spoken about that before. So
Yeah,
before we get into it, any watch news on your end? Anything at all you've done this week?
I'm working on something that's actually headed your way. You had sent me almost, oh God, it's too long ago now. You sent me a nice little package of some cool British stuff. So I finally returned the favor after months of things sitting around my house and not going to the post office. And I got I just checked the tracking information and check this out. It has reached Heathrow and departed Heathrow. So it should be coming your way fairly soon.
Now I have a nasty feeling that there is something in there, and I'm certain that I know what one thing is.
You do know one of the things, yeah.
The little gift from Quran.
Yes, the Pepsi. Yep.
I
Yep.
can't wait. Fantastic. That might last all of 2 seconds and then just go
hmm
straight in the bin. So
I'll give you a teaser. There's some items of clothing in there. There's a toy.
okay.
Um, yeah. So we'll leave the rest for a surprise.
I hope we're talking. What are we talking? Child's toy or some sort of love toy or?
Child's toy. That
Okay.
will you'll understand the theme of it quickly. Yeah.
Child's toy. So is that got anything to do with my height at all? Is that?
That wasn't the intent, but you're just setting yourself up there. I don't know.
Dan, you look like a
We'll see.
12-year-old. So have a Happy Meal toy. Thanks.
Maybe. I might have gotten some ideas from some of our viewers.
Have I got any watch news? I went to Henley-on-Thames yesterday, which is where Bremont. I didn't go to Bremont. I don't even know where it is in Henley-on-Thames.
Mhm.
Um, so that's probably really my only link to watches this week. I
Hey,
went to
that's all right.
Henley-on-Thames yesterday. Well, actually, I'll tell a lie. We had to do a course at work called Teach the Teacher, and it's an accredited course that enables you to teach people on any particular subject. Um, Obviously, mainly within the working environment, and we had to all do our own presentations and to put these new skills into use. The presentation was only meant to last 15 minutes. I did a talk on the Speedmaster and the history behind the Speedmaster. And bearing in mind, everyone that was watching they're not watch people, they've got nothing to, they know nothing about it at all whatsoever. The presentation went on for an hour. But that was mainly because of questions from people.
I do say we have to avoid Speedmasters on these chats sometimes because it'll take the whole hour. That's exactly what happened, right?
That's exactly what happened.
It sounds really good, though. I'm sorry to
Very
make
good.
fun. It sounds cool.
Yeah. It was. I enjoyed it. It was very cool. So
Good,
yeah,
good.
and talking in front of people, standing up is quite a daunting task for a lot of people. Even talking on here. I mean, it's getting easier, but even talking on
Right.
here in the past was something that I was particularly worried and a bit nervous about. I think you not so much because you do it for your job, don't you?
Yeah, it's just a bit more. I mean, I've not always been good at it or anything. I'm not saying I'm good now either, but we do okay.
Yeah, but you get a little bit more used to it and a bit more confident at it. So, and I must say, doing these on here, and we've spoken about this already, doing this on here, I think actually helped. So,
Good.
yeah,
That's fun.
it's quite cool.
Collateral benefits. Yeah, nice.
Definitely. Also, while we get on to the topic, if people want to comment below, what are they wearing today? We never ask people what they're wearing.
Yeah,
And
let's check it
this,
out.
this is watches, not underpants or anything like anything like that. So if people want to comment below what they're wearing today, I think we'd be interested. So
Yeah, sounds good. We'll try to pick out some favorites and call them out. Cool.
yeah, cool.
Um, yeah, so shall we get into it?
Yes, let's go
Oh,
for it.
well, actually, we've got some responses. Sorry, maybe I've been preempted
Oh,
things.
just before we move on as well, Arthur and I want to try and utilize a little bit more the question. So the question mark icon down below. If you've got any particular questions that you want us to answer, or whatever, take the piss, whatever you want to say. It's very hard to keep up with the comments and talk to you guys at the same time. So if you could actually put your comment down there on the question mark, and Arthur will pick that up at some point.
Yeah,
So
it saves it for us so that it doesn't get lost in
yeah,
the chat. And we're going to be, and try to, so for this topic, for movement related questions down there, any making fun of us, regular chat's fine. And we'll do a second session for free for all stuff at the end too. So,
yeah. So if we do miss your question and we go to the second live, ask it again and we'll pick it up. So we just don't want to miss people's questions because we seem to be quite good at
right.
missing people's
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So let's
cool,
see. So looks like my mom is wearing her Cartier tank. Very nice, mom.
cool.
Um, Arrested Time, Black Bay 58. I almost wore mine. Very good. Um, Swiss Made Obsession, both wearing their Explorer ones. That's the
Very
power
cool.
couple move. Identical watches. Man.
See, Arthur, I like the way how you're alienating our watches here, and you completely skipped over OX watch because he's wearing a Fitbit.
I
Just
was going to
ignore
come
him,
back
OX
to
watch.
that.
He's not
No,
ready
poor
to
guy.
go, is he?
Poor guy, poor guy. Hey, there are times
Nothing
and
wrong with
places
that.
for that. Yeah.
Nothing
Blacks
wrong with
and
that.
tartans with the Seiko 5. Tell's got his Black Bay bronze on, and then Karan also with a bronze Zenith Pilot. Very cool. Very
Very cool.
cool. Seiko Tuna from Tinoki's. IWC Ingenieur from Koos. Very cool. I like that.
Oh, look at Watch Medicine. He's doing exactly what we didn't want anyone to do. What's your idea of Rolex out of the blue? Well, let's leave that until the second chat, shall we?
Yeah, right. We'll rant about that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So, do you want to kick off with movements?
Sure.
How you kind of thought about it to begin with when you started the hobby, and
Right.
yeah, let's go
So
for it.
I guess if I had to put it in one sentence on my thoughts now on do movements matter to me, yes, but only balanced against the aesthetics of the watch, the functionality of the watch, and the story of the watch. So for me, it's just one of a few factors that are almost equally important. But if I have two watches that I'm particularly interested in and trying to decide between, the movement is sort of that cherry on top that often makes that last bit of difference for me. So I think starting off, I might have even placed perhaps too much importance on an in-house movement, hearing, again, like we talked about last week, being influenced by others, around that. So I never had a plan to build a collection around movements, but when we started thinking about this, I actually realized I've got quite a lot of variety in movements. So I'll talk a bit more about those later, but how about for you?
I would say when I got into the hobby, it's not something I ever it's a wealth of information when you begin with, and it's so much information. I would probably say that a lot of people always go for aesthetics first and how it looks. And then as you get into the hobby and you develop a little bit more, you start to understand the different types of movements and different things. And then you might think about it a little bit more on your second or your third purchase. I think exactly the same as you. I may have been influenced a little bit and listened a little bit too much to the importance placed on in-house movements. But I think when you start to think a little bit logically, and Ariel Adams actually put it into perspective on one of the Scottish Watches podcasts when they were doing, is it 101 Facts about watches? He said that, it's very much like cars. When you've got this rare, Aston Martin that's had this bespoke engine. Obviously, this is very generic. This is not for all Aston Martins, but when you've got this rare supercar, and they've only ever developed, 100 engines, 50 engines, the actual kind of use of that engine, the research, the development, is not sometimes as well thought through as what a standard ETA, Solita, but a standard Ford engine or something like that, because the Ford engine has had essentially the customer with the daily use of a vehicle, or exactly the same the customer with maybe the daily use of a watch, or it's because it's a lower price point, it might get used for everyday life.
Right.
In actual fact, it's more reliable, parts are easier to get. And
it's essentially been proven and tested by all of the owners, right, over time,
exactly.
and refined.
So we'll get back to that point in a minute, because I think that's something we'll discuss a bit further. But so my importance was placed a lot on in-house, and thinking maybe I should really be spending more money to get an in-house, and then actually finally thinking, well, it's a cherry on the top. It's a nice cherry on the top, but it ultimately, does it really matter to you? If it's all a personal preference. To me,
it is.
Not so much.
Right.
Not so much.
And I think, to me, it's for me personally, it's more of a differentiator at a certain price point. Like, well, I guess I'd say above a certain price point, I'd probably be less likely to see the value in a watch that didn't have an in-house movement. I think it sort of adds to the value to me, and maybe it shouldn't necessarily, but I think I really like something that Ariel Adams said on the Watches 101 podcast with Scottish Watches, which was that in a lot of cases you're paying for the human hours that went into something in a watch. And even if it is still, machine manufactured movement, an in-house movement took dedicated design effort for that design, which is in probably fewer watches than a off-the-shelf movement.
Yeah.
So that is sort of a pro in terms of you're getting something more unique and less widespread, which people love in watches generally, but
Yeah.
you're also not getting one that's been tested and run as long and as many watches out in the world, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's an interesting thing to think about, and I don't, like I said, it's not something I've thought about until I would probably say fairly recently, and that podcast episode actually made me realise that properly, that is something that I take into account more now than I
yeah,
ever have done. Um,
right.
so so
We,
you would go back to what you said with your collection. No, knowingly have you got those picked your collection because of the difference in those movements? Have you done that knowingly?
it was not the grand plan, but it's
Yeah.
kind of ended up that I've had a diversity of movements. So, we've talked about collecting themes in the past, and I often go for brand variety and aesthetic variety. And in the process, I think I've ended up with movement variety almost unintentionally. So if you don't mind, I'll do sort of like a quick review. I did this for
Yeah,
myself,
yeah.
and I was
So,
like actually kind of surprised. So this is not necessarily in chronological order. Well, sort of. Let's start off with this. So one of my first watches was this Frederic Constant, actually their first in-house movement, which this mine's not the moon phase. I think this one's the moon phase version of this movement. This was their first in-house movement, and sort of got me interested in it because of the sapphire case back and a chance to see the finishing and all that. So there's my sort of Swiss automatic in-house. I have one other sort of regular Swiss automatic in-house in my Black Bay 58. This is the Tudor um, MT something something something,
yeah.
whatever it is. We told you this wouldn't be educational. um, then I have my Planet Ocean has a coaxial 8500 movement in it. So you start to introduce some more interesting technology, the silicon
Yeah.
balance wheel and spring and the coaxial escapement in this. So that's kind of an interesting twist on it. Um, Moving into the chronographs, I've got a Speedy Pro with the 1861, which is cam actuated horizontal clutch for the way the chrono engages. We could probably do a whole chrono show, but then when it came looking at my IWC Top Gun, I was actually glad that it is, well, this is manual wind, obviously. Then I have a chrono that's automatic, and it is column wheel actuated vertical clutch. So the engagement of the chrono is a vertical mechanism.
So
So
very much like a clutch plate engaging with a flywheel,
right,
uh,
yeah,
like a car clutch, basically.
right. It's almost like the horizontal clutch is more like the transmission of a car
Yeah,
engaging a new gear, and a vertical clutch is more like a clutch in a manual transmission in a car.
yeah,
Um, and then let's see, and then I've got Japanese made spring drive movement, recent acquisition in the spring season. I have a Swiss made manual wind 8-day in the Panerai, and German made manual wind Nomos in house in the club campus. So other than my Autodromo and my Tag Aqua Racer, I did end up with everything in-house movements, and a bit of variety there between manual wind, different power reserves, automatics, different types of chrono systems. So it kind of just worked out that way for me. Um,
it's interesting that you've definitely placed a lot more emphasis on your collection with your movements, whereas me definitely not so much. It's always been like, oh, I like the look of that, I'll buy it, and it's never the movement has kind of been a bit more of an afterthought. However, now I do think about it more. I mean, I've not listed all of my collection like you, but I've got 4 manual wines, 1 tuning fork, 4 automatics, and 1 quartz. So I've got
hmm,
a variation. One of the manual wines, which is an Timer, is quite different. I'll go on to that in a minute. But Yeah, so I do have a variation, but not like kind of you really. So
It, it's interesting because I don't really think it's not like from the beginning I was trying to check things off a list,
no,
but I just
but it's
found them
interesting how
interesting.
that happened.
Yeah, yeah, it really
Interesting how that
does.
happened. So with there's something else with in-house as well. I think is something that you should consider. And I thought about my Tiffany with this. Now that watch is an ETA with a module on top. However, its
Mm-hmm.
price was £16,000, which is a real, for me, I think is such a tough sell. But maybe you could argue the point that most people that were buying a Tiffany may not think about the movement and just think about
Right.
the look. But doesn't that change your opinion when watches start to get a lot more expensive? Does the movement matter even more to you?
I think so because it's at that price point you're expecting that sort of from the ground up this is something special, right? From the inside out. To me, the more I pay for a watch, the more I want that, you know, everything in that watch
Yeah.
was built specially by that manufacturer. And actually, I've got some interesting relevant questions if you wouldn't mind me jumping over to that.
Yeah,
Um,
go for it. Yeah.
let's see. Um, well, Tells asked, it's actually a long question, but there's a lot of emphasis regarding in-house movement. Are these seen as more reliable than, than ETA or Valjoux, or is it just me? I, I think that in most cases, it's probably the opposite, that they may be less reliable. That's in my personal opinion, because of, as you said, there's not as much sort of mileage on them out there in the world. Um, but they're seen as you're getting something more special because it's a different design than is in another watch. I mean, that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I mean, I'd love to know the rough modern production costs of building a in-house movement from start to finish.
Yeah, that'd
It
be
must be
interesting.
it must be astronomical. It's so expensive.
Yep, because it's all unique tooling and even
Yeah.
running tests and building prototypes as opposed to full-scale manufacturing, right?
So
Uh,
Karan said that's so going back to the Tiffany's, but that's because at the time Tiffany was purchased by Swatch Group. I'm
mm,
afraid that's not true.
is that
Yes,
because
Tiffany was
now
never been
it's
owned by Swatch Group.
yeah, I don't
Tiffany
know
was
that
their own company, and then they've been purchased by LVMH.
that's the recent news, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Eh, Taking your sort of question to an extreme,
Yeah.
right? Would anybody buy a Patek with a Lamania movement? Is what Karan says. I I think it's true that above a certain price point, you expect something unique for your money, even if it's not necessarily better or more reliable. But
Tiffany was not bought by Swatch Group, mate. He's persistent.
we'll get to the bottom of it. But
Yeah.
Dan has a reason he knows best on that topic, I think. um, Oxwatch has asked opinion on workhorse movement. I personally think they're great, but a watchmaker I work with doesn't think much of some of the ETAs. He gave an example. I think it was 2894. I think it all depends upon what type of watch you're buying, especially if it's a tough tool watch that's going to serve you as sort of like a everyday, almost mechanical equivalent to a G-Shock. I wouldn't want that to be something in-house or delicate or hard to fix necessarily, right?
Exactly. And maybe that's another thing I think to appreciate as well, or to think about, is when a movement becomes a workhorse movement, it's so widely used that, and so reliable for it. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, right. True.
Yeah.
Watch medicine's just raised an interesting point here that within watch collecting community, sometimes the movement really makes the difference. And the interesting example here is I think the Daytonas with the Zenith movements from the late 80s and through the 90s are more desirable to collectors, but what came later was a full in-house Rolex movement, right?
Yeah,
Um, so that's an interesting one, but it's not, it's Rolex using another manufacturer's movement and actually highly modifying it in that case. But the El Primero as a movement is sort of iconic and has its own importance. So I think that's one reason that case is different, in
yeah.
my opinion.
So I've just seen that he's put a link up. So I've just Googled it. It was a partnership between Tiffany and Co. and Swatch Group. It wasn't ownership.
Ah, okay, okay,
It was
okay.
never ownership. Uh,
Oh, I think Gigi sent me a message. Let's see what
okay, yeah,
he's, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep, it was about the partnership as well,
yeah,
right? So not a full purchase, but it was a partnership agreement um, for some, seems like fairly short period of time, maybe 2008 to 2011, I think that's what I'm seeing.
yeah,
Thanks, Gigi. That's good. So
yeah.
sort of confusing nuance there about it wasn't
Yeah,
ownership, but it was
but they must have.
partnership and
Yeah, well, they were using their RETA movement. Although finding that information of what was actually in the Tiffany I've got is actually really difficult. I found it in the end, but it's not something that's widely. They kind of marketed it as their own, but it's not, is it?
not,
Have you?
no, not really, no.
So going to the IWC.
Yeah.
So when you bought that at the time, you considered there was vertical clutch in house. Was that a big part of buying that because of that
It
particular
was it was a
chrono?
differentiator from some of their other chronographs in particular because well, so the prior Top Gun chrono was an in-house flyback and priced a bit higher in the ceramic case.
Yeah,
And what was below that in the lineup, the steel chronos, had basically Valjoux 7750s, and actually they still do, other than the Spitfire. So when the Spitfire chrono and the new Top Gun came out, they both shared this new um, in-house chrono movement with the vertical clutch and the column wheel. And to me, that was like, oh, finally, there's sort of like this sweet spot in their lineup that has the Top Gun ceramic case and finally an interesting in-house movement. So that for me, it was like I wanted an IWC pilot for a while. I wanted a chrono, and finally it was like, okay, now I feel like I've got that sweet spot of value and interest from the inside to the outside of the watch. So
yeah. 'Cause I was with the at the time that you bought that, I bought the Navitimer,
yeah,
and
that's right.
actually, what was a very big part of buying that obviously was the aesthetics and what it is, but it was also the movement, and it was because it was a modern movement with a vertical clutch, 70-hour power reserve. It was a B09 movement, which is actually a B01. It's an automatic movement, but without the rotor. I've got a picture. There we go.
Yeah, nice. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Obviously, you can't. I think it's cool that they've decorated it. However, you can't see it because it's a solid case back.
That's actually one of our questions was brought up by Watchmaster. Oops, sorry. That's the wrong question. I do want to answer that. It was
Okay.
from Wax and Tartans, actually. With a closed case back, does the perfect finishing on the movement matter? How do you feel
I'm glad
about
you
it?
brought that up because I've actually written that down in my notes. As in, that is. It's funny, isn't it, that was such a big decision to me. That movement. However, it's a solid case back and you can't see it. But it's knowing that. For me, it's knowing that I've got essentially a vintage watch, but with modern underpinnings. And again, we've spoken about this before. That's kind of something that, for me, is so high up on the list, and I just really love that. I love the fact that it's something that looks vintage, but for the modern day and using it all the time is quite practical.
Yeah, right. It's got
So
the reliability and the
yeah,
accuracy. And I do think about what's behind the case back of my IWC. It's solid
yeah,
as well. Gigi, Time to Talk Watches raises an interesting point that I think I've heard people say this. It's a joy for who services it, and it's sort of a watchmaker taking pride in what they've created, even if the only other person that sees it is a watchmaker
Yeah.
down the road, right?
Yeah.
There's something cool about that to me.
It definitely. And the fact that it's a closed case back and it is that well finished, there is pride in what they're making. 100%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure.
The reason I've put this picture back up is because Tell said he's never actually seen the 806 movement, so that's just a slightly different shot of it. So
Yeah,
yeah, which is very cool, and derives from the B01, which I actually think is a really nice movement to look at.
right. And isn't there an interesting partnership between Tudor and Breitling where a sort of a variant of the B01 is used in the Black Bay chrono as well?
That's right, yeah. So there's been an article posted today on Fratello where it's a Tudor versus the new Chronomat, and it goes into that partnership because
Okay, cool.
at some point, Tudor actually labelled it as an in-house, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know this. They labelled it as in-house, and it's actually a base Breitling movement, and it upset a lot of people. I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I hadn't heard that bit.
So yeah, check out Fratello. Check out that article because it's quite cool. I'm only halfway through it at the moment. Haven't read it all, but it so far it's very cool. I like these articles they do of one watch versus another.
Yeah, they're
I think
fun.
that's quite cool.
A relevant question. This is sort of the flip-flop side of that. We're talking about how interesting in-house movements can be, and we talked a bit about the reliability of an off-the-shelf movement. Koos is giving an interesting example here. It's annoying when an in-house movement is getting the date wheel stuck, don't you think? And in case you're not familiar, what he's alluding to here is some of the Tudor Black Bay GMTs have had date wheel issues, and a couple of friends. I think I saw a traveling timepiece down in the comments here. I think he sent his back for service twice trying to get that resolved. Yeah, see the crying face emoji down there? So there are risks, I guess, right? I mean, they're not all 100% stellar, but hopefully that gets worked out for him and others who've had that issue.
Yeah, I think that issue's kind of all resolved. You don't really hear much about that anymore, do you?
Not as much, but I think he just sent his back for fixing quite recently, really. So hopefully it's gonna. I think the first time it was sent to a third-party service center by the shop he bought it from, which I think he got it. I think he got it used, and I think that's why. And then this time, I think they've sent it properly to Tudor and Rolex, and I think hopefully that'll get worked out. So
Yeah.
um, okay,
I've actually gone back to the Tiffany. I
yeah,
know you mentioned it before, but there it is there. That's the ETA based. I'm not going to say it again because I can never say it. The module, the pas de prix, or
the bois de Prat.
that's it. That's it.
You're closer to France, shouldn't you be better at that? I don't know.
No, English are rubbish for pronunciation.
Yeah. Oh,
So here's a question.
Oh,
Here's
go
a
ahead.
question
Yeah.
for everyone and for yourself. What is, I'll just go back, the smallest mechanical watch movement in the world? Does anyone know?
I have a guess. I know of a very small one. I don't know if it's the smallest though.
Okay,
I
go on,
think
go on.
the JLC 101.
You are correct.
Yeah, nice.
It is. I couldn't believe it. Look how small that is.
That's the head of a match. Yeah,
Yeah, that is unbelievable.
that's incredible. It goes in basically like a diamond bracelet, right? That's
Yeah.
essentially with a tiny, tiny. There it is. Yep.
See, if Arrested Time had that on when I met him, I'd certainly take him out for a dinner date.
Dan, I know you'd probably like to wear that, but doesn't it wear a little large for you?
Oh, that's a bit harsh. I was actually on about Arrested Time wearing that.
Oh, I know. I just turned it around. I couldn't let you just. He can't respond as easily, so that's not really fair. Yeah, it's really cool movement. We've got some other interesting questions here. Watch Medicine's asked, there you go, for Arrested Time. Arthur, what's your opinion on the in-house Panerai movements? I really like mine, the 8-day manual wind. I think the finishing can be a little bit basic. They've gone for sort of like a very sort of industrial looking approach. But if you get close up, it's actually quite nice. They do sort of like a horizontal brush on the plates. But there are some really nice polished bevels around here, and they certainly get more interesting than this. Just happens to be the one that I have.
I do think the bridge supporting the wheel looks really cool.
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
oscillator.
I think they've
That
done
does look
two
cool.
different versions of this balance bridge with the movement over time too. So I,
Escapement is what I was looking for.
yeah, actually, Panerai is a good example, I think, where at some of the prices they charged in the like early 2000s with off the shelf movements in them, certainly sort of an off the shelf movement, like a pocket watch movement is essentially what was in the original Panerais Rolex pocket watch movements. So them sort of continuing that was in a way true to what their brand had done with movements, but they certainly sort of like beefed up the value of what you were paying when they started going in-house, in my opinion. To me, that made a difference.
So there's a point that you made about JLC and their movements,
Yeah,
and when you start to get to like higher end spectrum, like Google 4C, stuff like that, which is well and truly out of my spectrum, but it's also out of my spectrum because it's not, like I've said before, I appreciate that sort of stuff and it's amazing to look at. But it would never be for me. It was just
yeah.
not,
It's
not
a
for
sort
me.
of a territory of watches where the movement is the centerpiece of what you're getting, right? It
That's the
and
art, isn't it?
yeah, and it's inherently beyond sports watches, right? By definition, sports watch is more about a function, I think, and an
Yeah.
aesthetic in some cases. But you start to get into the high horology where so much of the focus is on the movement. I mean, just giving examples like, here we go. Like, I mean, at the top end, you've got stuff like a lot of Longas are, have fairly simple looking dials, but then the back end is this, and this is the start of the show. I mean, they're a bit out of our reach in what we and preferences in some way, but it's just another territory where absolutely the movement matters. I mean, that's what you're going after, really, in a case like this, I
Definitely.
think.
And I mean, you have to admit, don't you? I mean, that is a work of art, and that is absolutely unbelievable. And Arrested Time, I'm not posh enough for that. Well, yes, probably right. That's the Renaissance, isn't it?
Yeah, or Resonance.
Oh, that's it. Residence, bloody Residence. Yeah, that one. The one that King Plum's got. And
That's
like,
right. Yeah,
and like to remind us all about a million times that he's got it.
that's right. Exactly. But I do think there's an interesting. Actually, hold on. I think it's Watch Medicine really wants to highlight a particular watch.
Okay.
Um, he's
Is it
asked me to
Panel?
show the datograph movement, which I did. Thank you very much. But the 4500V Vacheron. Let's see. I actually don't know off the top what. I think it's the one in the overseas. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's some shots of it. Really beautiful. I mean, this is in the regular overseas three-hander.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an overly complicated movement, but just beautifully finished. Um, Good stuff.
It is lovely, but like I say, for me, that's just getting a little bit too deep. That's too deep into the hobby for me. While I can appreciate it, I would rather spend the money on a Ferrari or an Aston Martin or something like that than
Yeah,
spend
right.
that sort of money on a watch,
Yeah.
personally. Because you can't go sideways in a watch and have a dizzy.
It can't take you anywhere, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it can go with you places. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
difference.
yeah.
Our,
Here we go.
my friend Asim, Drive to Zen, has an interesting question here. He said, maybe you guys already talked about this, but isn't there a third category of off-the-shelf movements that are sort of rebuilt or refinished by a manufacturer? That's an interesting area too. And actually, those IWCs with the Valjoux 7750s, they I and that, again, not being a watchmaker and having seen one opened up, I don't know how much they modify or refinish. You know, there's sort of some brands that change the rotor or engrave the rotor on an off-the-shelf movement and then sort of give it its own name. But there's certainly degrees of that, and it's a bit of a gray area, really, for me at least.
Yeah, and me as well. So when we start going into the depths of the movements and how they're finished and stuff, at some point it would be great if we could get someone on that actually knows what they're talking about. So I've spoken to him a few times, and I've mentioned him before, and I know you've seen him. So Antique Watch UK and Kibble, James Kibble. Well, Antique Watch UK, he sells vintage pieces, but he services them, restores them. And I did mention to him at some point about getting him on the show. So
Yeah, that'd be
if
cool.
anyone's got actually in-depth questions, because he actually does it for a living, that would be really cool.
You can get real factual answers to technical questions.
Exactly. And this moves me on. Speedmasters. So he sent me a picture from another account called Amiga Enthusiast, and he sent me an 861 next to a 321. I know they're very similar to each other, but they are differences, which I'm sure you're all aware of.
Yep. Cool. So it's
So
an 861 and a 321? Is that what you've got there?
So the 861 there, the bridges are different shapes to the 321. Obviously, you've got column wheel and you've got cam actuated chronograph. But yeah, they are quite different. So I just thought that was quite a cool comparison picture.
Yeah, that's neat to see. I love it, and I think it's cool. But it did make me think of that meme, and a meme format says like no one colon blank Dan. This is the difference between a 321 and an 861 movement. No, it's cool. It's cool. I'm just messing with you.
I tell you what, we haven't spoken about then. Quartz.
Oh, yeah.
Annie Digi. Because I think Annie Digi is something that's definitely missing from my collection. I know that you have one already.
Mm-hmm.
So what about quartz? Because I think quartz, to begin with, at the hobby, it can be frowned upon. And then as you get into it a little bit more, you actually realise it is part of the story.
Right.
It is part of the hobby, and it is cool in its own right.
It is cool in its own right. I mean, at this point, we've sort of gotten used to quartz was a revolution, right? And then now we take it for granted. But I think it's really cool companies, especially like Grand Seiko, that are who's the other one? Citizen's doing some really high accuracy quartz.
Yeah, they do. And
taking that to an extreme with a focus on precision and accuracy is really cool, I think. For example, I don't know if you've had a chance to play with one of the Grand Seiko quartzes, the 9Fs, I think. But so they do interesting things, like they're thermally compensated, so they know that the oscillation of that quartz crystal changes in different temperatures, and it compensates for that. They've done some things to eliminate some of the gear backlash that you often get on a quartz watch, where it ticks, and sometimes it actually, if you do watch it slow-mo, overshoots and wobbles back, or it doesn't line up with the markers. They actually have essentially like a stepper motor that does like 2 clicks per second. So they've tried to engineer out a lot of the downsides of quartz and just make it the best it can be. And I think there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, I think so. Wasn't it also the fact that the torque created from the motor is so strong that there has to be some form of braking to stop it, like you say, stop that kind of
the overshoot. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. I don't know if we're using all the right words, but yeah, I think we're describing it roughly.
You know what you mean?
Yeah, right.
So, I won't get onto it just yet. But Jason, who's in here now, Turner Keys, he's messaged me some very cool alternative movements which I have never heard of before. Here we go. He's just come up with it now. Look. So in 1970, let me just flip my page so I get my facts right. Seiko in the 1970s released an electronic watch that was powered by a nuclear battery that was developed by McDonnell Douglas. That is crazy.
Was it shielded for your health?
I don't think so. Obviously, the technology never caught on because the popularity of nuclear, is, as we all know, is not popular. But I thought that was very cool. And then in 1998, Seiko released a watch called the Thermic, which is works on something called the Seebeck effect, which uses body heat to power the movement. Did you know that?
No, I'd never heard of that. That's really cool.
And it looks like this.
Funky.
Yeah.
It had to look weird because, anything with new technology has to look weird, right?
Yeah. But how cool is that? A watch with a nuclear battery. Yes.
That's wild. And
he asked me
I figure
about,
we have to come around to this, right? The Accutron.
Yeah, the Boulevard. There we go. So obviously that's Omega's rebranded of the Boulevard Accutron movement. He thinks that Max Herschel, who developed it in 1955, was an alien, because how the hell did he come up with something like that?
So for those that don't know, it's actually got a tuning fork, right? That's oscillating at an extremely high frequency, and that's your timekeeping device, right?
Yeah. If anyone wants to see a video on it, I will message them the link, because to see it actually in action is absolutely amazing. How they came up with that.
Yeah,
and also was used. The timing units were used in the seismic equipment that they left behind from the Apollo missions.
Oh,
which is quite cool. So they left charges on the moon. They set those charges off once they left the moon for safety reasons, and they would record how the crust would react and how the moon would react. And those instruments had Boulevard Accutron movements in them.
For timekeeping. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And cool. Interestingly, for those that haven't heard, they're bringing back the Accutron as its own brand now, with a new type of movement that I don't know how to describe technically, other than the fact they're calling it an electrostatic movement. And it's actually a new model. I think people started to reference it. Watch Medicine said $3,000, but I guess it falls in this category of where the watch is about the movement, but it's also not just about the finishing of a traditional mechanical movement, but it's a new, like, novel architecture and approach, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of cool. I think it looks interesting. It's a bit big and a bit expensive, but I'd love to play with one.
They're about, how much are they? About $3,000.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It looks like a turbine blade, doesn't it?
It does. I think that's probably why I like it. And I've seen some videos with these rotating pretty quickly. It looks kind of neat.
I don't actually mind that. I would like to see it.
Surprising. Look at this. Maybe you're getting open-minded from all this talk.
I'd like to see one. But they're quite big, aren't they? I think there's two. There's a limited edition one, which is 44, and I think the non-limited editions are 43.
Right, and they've got sort of different case designs too, like more sort of futuristic and more. That was the more sort of classic-looking one, I think.
So I do think that is a movement that is missing from your collection.
True. I don't have a tuning fork. That would be cool. That would be cool.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting. We spent sort of like the first half of the show focused a lot on traditional mechanical and in-house versus not. But I think it is important that we got into sort of non-mechanical and alternatives, like tuning fork movements, where part of the fascination is the movement itself, but it's not necessarily extremely expensive or, hand finished or anything, but it's part of the star of the show, which I think is cool.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. Another point I wanted to touch on, when you're buying your watch, and again for people in here as well, before you buy it and you're considering the watch, do you consider servicing and servicing costs, and maybe in 10, 20 years' time, how difficult that watch is to get parts for? Because if it is an in-house
Mm.
movement on a fairly low production or not many, are you going to be able to service that watch in the future? I mean, I know it's a risk because no one knows if a company's going to be around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time. I guarantee
Right.
Rolex will be.
I think they're going to
But
be okay.
yeah, is that something you would consider?
It's entered my mind, but it's never, made or broken a decision on a watch. I guess I mostly buy things to keep, but I don't really think that would be a problem unless we're talking, decades out, right? Depending upon the brand and how they support their old products and whether they're around. So it's not something I've thought about. Also because I guess the value of the watches I buy are not so high that it would be the absolute end of the world, if that
Yeah.
happened. Um,
I think, like with the watches that we have, and probably a lot of people have, are fairly mainstream. So the production has been quite large numbers of them. So the chances of them being quite difficult in the future is probably not going to happen. But Anthony Watch UK, I did ask him a question a while ago about servicing modern watches, and he did say the problem is not so much the parts, it's the particular tools they develop to service these watches. So much like your car, they come up with different tools to remove things that you can only get from manufacturer.
mm,
So I thought that was quite interesting.
that is interesting. So
Yeah,
it's like keeping cornering the market on servicing their pieces, right? It's like designing for not necessarily for good maintainability or repairability, but just to control that. That is kind of an odd thing. I mean, I
it
feel
is.
like with most in-house movements, you're sort of locked into manufacturer run servicing anyway, but
Yeah.
they're really making sure that's the case, right?
Yeah, and I think so. I do think that's something, the rest of the Times just said there. Let the kids worry about that. Um, but in my strange mind, and kind of the engineer inside me thinks about that sort of thing. Yeah, modern cars now are built to a way that, and I know we're using cars all the time as
Hmm.
a comparison, but it is quite similar. Modern cars, for example, certain parts of it now are so pointless to repair that you just replace something. So is there an element of that and modern production that's coming over to watch production?
I hope not, because in cars, I feel like it's making them more disposable.
Yeah,
And to me, watches are a lot about lasting a long time with you in your life. So from a sentimental perspective, I really hope that's not happening. I don't know.
no, no, maybe definitely more so in the electrical side of things,
Hmm.
because I do think once the support has stopped for a certain type of microchip or transistor or something like that, you're not going to be able to reprogram that again later on or whatever, because it
No.
takes equipment at the time to do it. Whereas a mechanical item, essentially you can manufacture anything for something mechanical, can't you? It may
Right.
cost a lot of money because you've got to get the jigging and the equipment to do
Hmm.
it, but it can be done.
Right. And you can see the design of the original part to replicate it, even if you don't have the original drawings potentially. But something like a circuit can be so complex and opaque from the outside. I mean, sure, a circuit, but like if there's any programming involved, as in the case of cars, right?
Yeah.
Who knows what
I'd,
that code is, and it's probably pretty locked down in there.
I'd be interested to know with how long, and I know it's like an ordinary Casio quartz movement. If the battery's changed every so often so it doesn't corrode, if it's looked after, and what I mean by that is not thrown around or subject to extreme temperatures or anything. I'd love to know how long that movement will last for, how long it will work.
Yeah. I mean, must have some lubrication requirements, right? Because it's still moving parts, but
Yeah,
uh, My
And
Tag
it's,
Aqua Racer Annie Digi was purchased in 2008 and hasn't been touched other than one battery change. So,
but what about a Soul Digital
mm,
sports watch? So that
yeah,
be interesting to see how long something like that would actually go on for.
that's a good point because there's no moving parts basically, right?
Yeah. And actually, Coo just come with a brilliant point. This is something that Jay Leno does with his car collection. Obviously, his cars are so old that they can't manufacture parts for them anymore. So they just print them. They 3D print them. So
That's interesting.
maybe that's something that will come in the future. 3D printing parts for watches.
3D printing at that small scale might have additional challenges that you don't have on a car part today, but I think we could get there, right? Depending
Yeah.
upon the part.
Yeah. So I know we're about to end shortly. I have got some more questions asked by other people. So when we go into our second live, we'll address those questions. And again, anyone else in here, if they've got any more questions,
Yeah, I've got a
ask.
couple. I want to, if we can get to them before we
Yeah.
end here. Let's see, I'm going back. Tanoki's says, would you buy a no-name brand, but largely because of the movements and specs? I did the Lawrence Lamania 1500 or 5100. Hmm. I
So I was actually going to address this question, but he's obviously desperate. There's the watch there.
Interesting. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
It's cool. I
So
I don't.
he bought that because of the movement, but it was considerably cheaper than, say, Amiga or another brand that would use that same movement.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I mean, that's sort of very movement focused collecting in that case, right?
Yeah,
I personally haven't done something that, a watch focus or watch purchase focus so much on having this particular movement. But that's cool. I mean, that's the variety of how different people do it.
watch medicine hashtag brand sluts.
I think we know where he stands there.
Yeah,
Um, Instablanes asked an interesting question we didn't really talk about, but does power reserve matter? To me, a little, but I'm often rotating my watches around, so I've got enough to rotate through. They're almost always stopped before I put them on again, regardless. So,
I think it's one of those things. It's a cherry on top. It's nice to have more of a power reserve, but do you actually really need it? I
no.
don't think so. Or it
The
depends on how much you're going to change a watch.
and the only place where the power reserve matters to me, I think, is with my Panerai. 8 days, it's like that's the fun of it, right? You wind it. It takes you like 5 minutes to wind, but then you don't have to touch it for like eight. I've even had to run 9 days and pick it up and it's still going. So we're about to get cut off, and it's like some questions we haven't gotten to, but for those that are with us on Instagram, we're going to restart and try to make sure we do get to those questions. For those watching later on YouTube, thanks for joining, and try to come out to Instagram Live to join directly in the future. So this was a good
Cool.
one.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. See you shortly.
All right. Thanks for watching. Check us out on the
Bye.
Scottish Watches Live channel too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.